Here's an overview of the iHeartMedia Switchblade SIP Contributor app. I'm calling it the Contributor app because it's designed to run on remote devices, essentially Windows devices. It could be a laptop, it could be a PC, it could be a Windows tablet, where you're out in the field and you're ready to connect back to the studio in one of several different ways and contribute some content. It's going to come as an installer, and you'll install it just like you would any other Windows application. You'll step through all of the steps, and then when it's done installing, you'll end up with an icon on your desktop that looks similar to this. The desktop in its native form, or the shortcut in its native form, is just going to say contributor. You can change it to say your market name or whatever you may like. But the most important thing you need to do is open up the properties for this and tell it where it's going to get its configuration data. The way this app is configured is not like other apps. Most SIP apps, you load it on and then you have to assign a SIP account to it, and then you have to go in and tell it all the address entries that it needs to call. In this case, we're going to administer that through XML files that live in the cloud. And here's a quick example of an XML file, and we'll have templates that you can use and edit and modify for your use. But essentially, all it is are common names that will appear to the user of the app, and then the associated SIP addresses that relate to this common name that kind of live in the background. So in this case, we've created a XML file for Madison called iHM MSN. We've identified a few devices for it to connect to, a couple of accesses, a couple of switchblades, and then you've got the SIP accounts that live in the background. The name of this XML file is iHMMSN.xml. So here we're going to tell it which XML file to pull down from the cloud to configure itself when the application launches. So we're just going to enter iHMMSN right after the exe. There's a space in there. We're going to hit apply and OK. And now when we launch the app, it's going to go ahead and open up. It's going to turn green, which tells us it has successfully connected to the internet and it's registered its internal SIP account. And when we click on the heart, we now have the essentially destinations that we configured in the cloud through that XML file previously. So in this case, the users of iHM MSN will have these destinations available to them. We can go through and add more to the XML, and then every time you click on the heart or you relaunch the application, it'll pull down a new version of that XML file. It'll then cache it on the machine and then update it every time there's an update in the cloud. You can also have more than one version. So here we've got Madison. If we look over here, we've created a second shortcut, but we pointed it towards an XML file called iHMMKE. In this case, when we launch the app, it comes up, but it's referencing a different XML file this time in the cloud. So here we've identified a few sources for Milwaukee that it is allowed to connect to. If none of these work, you can go down here and enter a manual SIP address, and it'll connect to that as well. But let's just look at it, assuming that we've got a user, they've installed the application, we've pointed the shortcut towards the XML into the cloud, the application's going to launch, it's just going to have a couple of blank sliders on it, the monitor or what's coming back, and then our sending or microphone or line in or whatever we've decided we're sending back to the station. So let's click on the heart and look at some of our possible destinations. Again, we can connect to any SIP-enabled device. So if we wanted to connect to the Comrex Access, we can do that. And we can look, we can see we're connected. And it is playing the audio. If we go back here and click on our heart, here we have a WRNW Studio Switchblade connection. This is our volume control for what we're hearing back from the station. Here's our volume control for what we are sending back to whatever codec we're connecting to. It's got a basic VU meter on it. Yellow means we're clipping. That's bad. We can mute any of those sources by clicking the soft buttons. Fairly self-explanatory. If we go back up, connect to the barracks, we're now connected to a barracks. So any SIP-enabled codec, this is just a SIP-enabled application that we've built that basically does what we want it to do. And this enables it to connect to any other SIP-enabled codec and pass stereo audio back and forth from any Windows-enabled device that may be out in the field. One additional step that you can configure in the XML file that we'll talk about in our advanced video is for connecting to switchblades. You can then define function buttons. Those are defined in the XML file and can perform functions in NextGen or within WheatNet. And we'll discuss that in a later video. There is a couple of hidden menus in the application that we can talk about. If you click on Shift, Control, Alt, and then right-click on the red X, that brings up a hidden menu. And in there, you can define the SIP account that's assigned to the machine. You can also decide which Windows sound devices that the app will use. If you just use default, it will follow what is set in the control panel. You can also define any codecs that you may wish to enable or disable in the background. In most cases, that's not going to be needed. In most cases, you can just launch the application. It'll pull the XML file down from the cloud. You then simply click on what you wish to connect to, and it will connect, and off it goes.
Came out in 2017. Never heard of it.